This is Mary Struthers interviewing Jerry Maher at Hastings Associates on July 5th, 1988 for the Hastings Oral History Project on the waterfront. Well, Jerry, I'm happy to be with you here today, and you're very nice to give me your time. And what I think we'd love to find out a lot of information about is your working here at Anaconda since I think you spanned a number of years while the company was in operation on the waterfront. But before we get to Anaconda, I'd love to hear from you about earlier parts of your life, memories you have of early childhood. So maybe we could start with when you were born and something about your family life.
Well, I was born May 9th, 1916, in Hastings-on-Hudson, in Uniontown. I went to school up on Farragut Avenue, the Hastings Grammar School. And then I transferred after a year or so to St. Matthew's Parochial School on Warburton Avenue. That's where it was then. And then I went to Hastings High School. Finished high school about 1934 and went to work for Anaconda. And I was also a member of the Protection Engine Company back in 35 maybe. Was there for about 6 years until I went into the service and moved out of Hastings.
And you moved out of Hastings in what year?
In 1946.
Uh-huh. So you spent about the first 30 years of your life in Hastings.
Approximately.
Yeah. Is there anything that you could tell us about your family life, like how many there were in the family, what ethnic background, where you lived in Hastings? I guess you said you lived in Uniontown, but more about your family.
Well, back in those days, people were moving all over the place, and the one man in town that moved everybody, I guess, was Abe Callahan, who worked at the Hastings Railroad Station. He was the baggage man, and he had his own truck, and he moved everybody. I guess he moved us 6 times. We moved from Uniontown to Warburton Avenue, over Ferreira's grocery store, which is now, I think, a florist. Then I lived on 33 Washington Avenue for a while. I also lived on Edmouth Place, and another apartment on Warburton Avenue. And then I went into the service in before that I was married in 41.
That's important.
And I lived in Yonkers for a short time, in an apartment down on Warburton Avenue, which I think they call a honeymoon suite at that time. All newlyweds. I lived there for about a year. Then I finally got an apartment in Hastings up on Olinda Avenue. And I lived there for approximately a year and a half, I guess. And I went in the service from there in 44.
Were you
what's that?
Were you from a big family?
I had an older sister. I had 3 younger brothers. The next to the youngest brother, he died as a child. And I have one brother left. He lives in Harrison. My brother Bob, and he and I are the only 2 left in the family. My sister Mary died of multiple sclerosis. And my brother Jack died, who lived in here in Hastings all his life. He married one of the Tanner girls. And my father worked in the post office for years. He retired from the post office. He wound up, he was in charge of the Hastings post office at the end. He finally got up there. And
did you get as much criticism in those days as we tend to criticize the post office today?
No, really, it was run very nice.
It ran smoothly up there.
I used to deliver special delivery letters, packages. And my brother also did that. And what else?
Had your parents lived Were they both from the United States originally, or had they come
no,
from another country? Or?
My mother was a Neely who lived in Hastings for years. I think she was born down at Riverdale, I think. That's going back before my time.
Yes.
And she was a Neely. And my grandfather, Neely, was in charge of the LeBoutler estate over on Farragut Avenue, if you know.
Yes, yes.
And in fact, I had diphtheria there in that little shack right on the corner, right on Farragut Avenue. There's a little shack there, the entrance to the LeBoutler estate. I'll never forget that.
What was that?
That's where you had to go out and pump your water.
Uh-huh.
And we had outhouses. We didn't have toilets in the house.
Yeah.
And let's see, what else?
Could you, is there anything that you would like to say in regard to your early schooling, like at in the Hastings schools versus St. Matt's? What it was like changing perhaps from the public school to St. Matthew's, or?
Well,
and
not
was that
much,
something
really.
a lot of your friends did? Was that a sort of typical?
Back in those days, of course, we were moving from Uniontown to Hastings anyhow, and it would be easier for me to go to St. Matthew's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the reason I didn't go right away, I don't think they had room, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the
Mm-hmm.
parochial schools were pretty well,
Yes.
because they were nuns.
Yeah.
The nuns ran the school. And they didn't run with 15 or 20 kids. There might have been 30 or 35 in the class.
Uh-huh.
And no, that was nice, because, and then I was an altar boy in St. Matthew's, of course, with Reverend Father O'Keefe, who was a real old nice Irishman.
Oh, good.
And
Were there any special other priests or nuns that would that
well,
you would like to comment on, either that changed your life or didn't change your
well, I
life?
think I was one of Sister Mary Magdalene's best pupils,
Oh, good.
according to Sister Mary Magdalene. But no, you had to behave yourself.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't easy.
Uh-huh. And were you taught all your classes like in one classroom by the same nun?
Yes.
Or did you move around to
No, in the first class, you were taught by one nun. Second class was taught by another nun.
Uh-huh.
But all the same subjects was taught by the one nun.
Yeah. How about sort of after-school activities? What would do you have any memory of what kids did those days after they got home from school, or was the school day longer? And
Well,
were there sports like the Little League and
no, we had no
recreation?
Little League. We had our own little ball teams. We played baseball. We played ball up in Reynolds Field. Not the big field, down the little where the
Yeah.
playground is, more or less.
So was that pretty much the way it is today? That your memory of sort of the lower Reynolds and
Yes, that's pretty much the same. But we didn't have all the equipment in the playground
yeah.
then as they have now.
Yes.
I think we had swings, if I remember correctly.
Uh-huh.
And then they came with the tennis courts later on. They're still up there, aren't
They're
they?
still
Tennis
there.
courts?
They're
Yeah.
not in great shape, but they are there.
Yeah. And of course, we used to watch St. Matthew's play baseball every Sunday up in the Reynolds Field. St. Matthew's Lyceum.
St. Matthew's what?
Lyceum.
Now, what was
Lyceum. It was just a club. It was a club. It was the building down on Warburton Avenue. It was an old wooden building, but it was good. They had meetings in there, and they had smokers. You know what the smokers are.
No, I don't know.
They had a few prize fights and games,
Oh.
and they called them smokers.
And that would be a form of
The big thing
social-
was the prize fights.
Yeah, and they had them at the Lyceum.
At the Lyceum.
Lyceum.
Yeah.
Was it big money on those, or was
No,
was it
no.
local talent, or did they have?
You know, there were some local fighters, but not too many. That I didn't know, really. I was kind of young then, too.
Uh-huh.
I didn't always go until I got a little bit older.
Uh-huh.
But that's about it. We didn't do any,
Yeah.
we didn't have that many activities, really.
Uh-huh. Was I was just you went to St. Matt's. I assume your family is Catholic. Was
Yes.
religion, was that an important sort of family
Oh, yes.
binding
Oh, yes.
experience?
Mhm.
And do you remember celebrating a lot of religious holidays? different,
Oh,
any
sure.
differently from you would today, or it's pretty, I
Uh,
mean, or would you say that's...
Not really, no, it's
Uh-huh.
about the same today.
Uh-huh.
But it seemed today, a lot of people today, not me, but these are religious holidays. They're called, so many of them are called days of obligation.
Yes,
They're
yes.
obliged to go to church.
Yes.
People don't do that much anymore, you know.
Uh-huh.
I still do, but where it's possible.
Yes.
And of course, I was an altar boy. I guess I told you that.
But that was, so
And,
that was probably a time-consuming activity. And,
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think altar boys today, do you think it's similar as training and,
Oh,
requirements, or do you think
today,
that's changed
today
quite a bit?
the altar boys don't do anything today. They don't even ring the bell in church anymore. and really, they don't do as much today as we did.
Yeah.
Well, we had to know Latin.
Uh-huh.
We responded to the priest.
Yes, that's right.
And they dropped all that.
Yeah.
In fact, you know where St. Matthew's is now on Ballard Avenue?
Uh-huh.
Well, that was a vacant lot years ago. Father O'Keefe would have us up there, the altar boys, a dozen or so, and he teaches Latin. We practice our Latin up there, sitting on benches or on the
Is that
grass.
right?
And that was, you know, after school, not during school.
Yeah.
It was very nice. Very nice.
And so you would be an altar boy for several years, starting as a...
Yes, until I
Yeah.
got out of the school, I
Uh-huh.
guess. Until I went to high school. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to, or like to say about favorite courses that you took in the high school, or
No, the
favorite
only,
extracurricular, or...
I was in one play. What was it? I'm not sure it was Hansel and Gretel or not. I think I was Hansel.
I hope you weren't Gretel.
I'm going wait. I think that's what it was. And I enjoyed that. I went through that. I liked, I took a little Latin. I wasn't crazy about Latin. What was it? I took a business course. And I was pretty good in arithmetic, business arithmetic, did they call it? I liked that. The teacher was a male, and his name was Gerald also, Gerald Fisher. And of course, he was a nice guy. He was all right. To me, anyhow.
Do you remember having much homework after school, in high school?
We had quite a bit. We had enough to keep you busy for a couple of hours, if I remember.
How about, your family seemed to move around a lot in Hastings. Did you have any sense of Hastings as being a very sort of close community, or was it divided between, you know, people who lived in one area cliqued together and people who lived in other neighborhoods stayed together?
No, of course. Let's see now. We were down in the village. The people in Mount Hope were different. We got along with them. I knew some of them. You know, you go to school with them.
Yeah.
And I had no problems, but I know there was a lot of jealousy, maybe, is that what you call it, or something? And of course, people that lived south over in Denver, they were the people across the bridge. That was a little different than the people on this side of the bridge. You know, because they all stuck together. I mean, well, that's the way it was all over, I believe.
Was it partly different ethnic backgrounds? Do you think that was
Slightly.
part of it?
Well, the people across the bridge were a lot of Polish people whose fathers came over on the boat and went right to work for Anaconda. That's one thing. And of course, they had the Irish flats down there. I don't know that there was any Irish living in them. That's what they called them. I guess there was Irish living in them years ago. But they were the Polish people. We had Sigurski's Hall on Washington Avenue, where they had dances just about every Saturday night, if I remember.
Now, is that something that you and your friends would go to?
Yes. Yes, we
Uh-huh.
used to go to skis.
Is that what it's called?
Sigurski's, yeah, we go down to skis. And
Would they have live bands, or?
oh yes,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
And how old would you have to be to get in? I mean, was it like drinking age?
I guess,
Would they have,
you know, I guess it was just about drinking age,
Uh-huh.
whatever that was, 16 and up,
days.
maybe. I don't. Yes, they had. You could have a beer. They had a bar there. We might. Yeah, we'd be drinking beer.
Uh-huh. Do you think there's anything like that around Hastings today?
No,
No.
not that I
Yeah.
see. I get around quite a bit, but it's completely changed.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have parking meters in those days either.
Having just come
And
to
the-
the court having to pay a fine on a ticket, I
Yeah.
can appreciate that. Okay, well, thank you for all that on earlier memories. Now, why don't we talk a little bit about your employment years? And I don't know if Anaconda was your first job. If it wasn't, maybe you could tell me where you worked before you worked at Anaconda.
Well, Anaconda was my first regular, steady job. Before that, this is something I should have brought up before. My uncle Charlie Neely had a stationery store on Warburton Avenue. I delivered papers for him. And that's when we used to get up at 4 o'clock Sunday morning, go down, fold all the papers. And then my cousin Jack Devon used to drive the truck. And we deliver the papers in bundles at different areas so that the paper boy would start off with one bundle, finish that, and then there'd be another bundle waiting for him, and he'd finish that. We had to work in those days when we delivered papers. And Charlie Neely was a pretty well-known man in town. I'm sure he must have been brought up sometime in this historical
Probably, yeah.
society.
Yeah.
And then after that, I worked in
And
Jacobs.
he was the owner of the stationery store.
Stationery
And he's
store.
your uncle.
You know the stationery store in Warburton area now?
Yeah.
Not the paper shop.
Right, but
The-
the stationery, Hastings stationery.
That was his stationery store.
Oh, right
It
there.
wasn't that big.
Uh-huh,
It was
that's
smaller.
amazing.
Then I worked for Jacobson's drugstore. I was a soda jerker for
Oh,
a few
great.
years. That was $5 a week. I forget how many nights. And then I went to work here in 34.
How did you happen to work at Anaconda originally? Was it
My father knew the plant manager. The plant manager. Vito Delestro, who passed away. And he got me the job in here.
And was at that, what was the year approximately that was,
34.
and that was 1934?
Yes.
So you were about 22 years old when you started working?
17.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Or should I thank you? No,
No,
I shouldn't thank you.
you were born in 1916 and you started working here in you're right.
In fact, you have my first pay envelope.
Is it
I gave it to
yes,
Mary and
that's
Martha.
Great. And how much was your first paycheck?
$14 and some change. I forget how much it was.
And that represented how much?
About 40 or 45 cents now, if I remember correctly.
And was that considered a good
That was-
wage?
that was
like
fairly
minimum?
good.
Yeah.
Not quite enough to get married on, but not bad, I guess.
Uh-huh. And at that point, how big a company was Anaconda? Can you tell us how many buildings there were and how many employees and?
Well, it's hard to say how many employees they had. They must have had 200 to 300 maybe. That would be counting the office too, I think. That's when they had the North Mill. They had 28 acres here. And let's see, I worked. But then, what do you want? I worked in one department.
Yeah, if you would maybe start off telling like what your first job was here in 34.
Right. Yeah, I was on a machine that rewound wire, or wound wire from a bigger spool onto a smaller spool.
Uh-huh.
And I worked with a lady. I wish I could remember her name. Very nice woman. Hastings woman. And I was there for, I don't know how many years now. Let's hope. 34. maybe about 4 or 5 years, and then I was made a sub-foreman. That's what they call the lowest boss in those days.
Oh, is that
It's a
right?
sub-foreman.
Uh-huh. Now, when you worked with a woman, was that were there a lot of women working?
There was quite a
on
few
the-
in those days.
There were.
Yes. Only one where I was. In fact, only one in that building, I think. But then we had other women in the weatherproof department who
Would she have been,
manufactured weatherproof wire and cable.
would she have been making the same wages you were doing the same job?
I believe so.
Uh-huh.
I believe so. I mean, so I don't remember really, but I think so.
So the job involved, it was a man winding, it was a physical
Yes.
sort of production line kind of job.
Yes, you weren't on incentives or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
You just got paid so much an hour.
Uh-huh.
But the boss would come over, and you didn't do too many spools. He would tell you didn't do it.
Uh-huh. Did the bosses tend to be other local Hastings people?
Well, you know Jack Lynch.
Yeah.
His father was my first boss.
Uh-huh. Good boss?
And yeah, he was.
Fair? Friendly?
He seemed like
Tough?
an old man, you know, and he wasn't. That's 54 years ago we're talking about, right? No, he was nice. He was all right. And
How about the idea of the different shifts at Anaconda? Would you have been working different shifts when you had that first job, or was it always?
on that job, if I remember correctly, we didn't have that many shifts. Later on, when I became sub-foreman, I think we had 2 shifts. I think maybe 8 to 4 or 4 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
Then later on, in 7, 30. Anyway, then I was made a foreman later
Uh-huh.
on.
From sub-foreman to foreman?
To foreman.
And sub-foreman, would you have been in charge of the people that you had been one of before, or were you shifted to another department?
No. The same department.
Same department,
The same
uh-huh.
department, yes. And when I became foreman, I was in the same department. A different part of the department, a little more of it.
Uh-huh.
All right. I worked in one, it was all the wire mill. They had this rewinding. You had wire drawing, fine wire drawing, coarse wire drawing, high-speed stranding, all in the wire mill. I gradually, as I became foreman, I was in charge of a little more
Uh-huh.
each time.
Uh-huh. And after you did, your part of the job was done, was then there another part of Anaconda here where something else would happen with that product, or was it then ready to?
Oh, no. That product might go, like say spools of wire.
Yeah.
Some of them might go to the tinning room to be tinned,
Uh-huh,
tinned wire.
uh-huh.
And a lot of it in those days, we put right on the Anaconda boat, the Knickerbocker, and shipped that over to Western Electric in Jersey.
Oh, wow, uh-huh.
In
So
big
boats were
steel
right
boxes. We used to put it down the hold of the boat. I didn't, but this
Yes,
is the way they did it.
yeah.
And took it right over to Western Electric in Jersey. I remember that. They had 2 boats. They had the Anaconda.
And that was.
And the Knickerbocker.
Uh-huh.
In fact, my mother remembers the Knickerbocker because she had lunch with the captain many a times. She was a switchboard operator in Anaconda
Oh,
before she was married.
yes, uh-huh. So your family has
These
gone.
things are coming to me, you know, as
Oh, well,
we
that's
talk.
great, that's great. So your family, you weren't the first member of your family to work at Anaconda?
No. Yes. She worked for the American Brass.
Oh, yes, your predecessor.
Yes.
Was there any feeling that, I guess it had been the National Conduit, then American Brass, then
Then
Anaconda.
Anaconda.
Was there any feeling that Anaconda was better than any of the companies that had preceded it? I mean, or it was just sort of an evolution, it was really the same company with a different name?
Well, Anaconda was a little bigger company because they started to do bigger things. Like they wound up manufacturing 745 kV high voltage cable, which was called for later on, you know,
Uh-huh.
later on.
Uh-huh.
Before that, when Anaconda, American Brass, they probably did mostly little wires, smaller wires.
So it was a bigger,
And not so much, maybe I guess they went into cables, but I know Anaconda really made the best electrical cable, I think, in the country for a while. At that time when Anaconda took it over, it was really the best.
So that must have been, there must have been a certain satisfaction out of, you know, working at a company that had the best product and that.
And it was the best because I can remember even one of my bosses said, "That damn tests, why the hell do they have to have so many tests? They kind of tested everything.
Yes.
It wasn't any good, it didn't go. And they were really very particular. I found this
That's
out because I'm
interesting.
on the inside witnessing it.
Yeah. Now, when you were foreman, did you have that position for a long time?
I think he's married in, when was I married, 41? I guess 4 or 5 years.
So you're still very young at this stage, aren't you?
Yes. Well, let's see. Then I had a little misunderstanding with one of the superintendents, one of my bosses. And really that's why I went in the service. We were doing war work here, and we didn't have to go. We were all deferred
That's
mostly.
right.
I don't know if I should put this on the tape.
Oh, absolutely. All little nuances of.
Well, I went upstairs to the girl in charge of the deferments and told her to take my name off the list. I'm not bragging, but that's how I went to service. And
Did you then get an appointment very soon after that
no, it
change
took
in
them
status?
about. What do you mean?
Well, once you had said, take me off the deferred list.
No, it took me a while before I was. Then I was. What do they call it? Called into the service. What do they call it? I was notified.
You were enlisted?
No, I was.
No.
I didn't enlist.
you were drafted?
Drafted. That's the word. I could have enlisted, but I figured I'd stay here until they called me. So they called me.
Yeah.
I was hoping, well, maybe they wouldn't call me, but they did. So I was only here for 2 years, 44 to 46. Then I came back and I was made a foreman. They gave me the job back. Then I was transferred to other departments. I was foreman in the yard for a while. Then I was made foreman in the lead room. Then I was made general foreman of the lead room, tank room, paper tape. A little bigger here, you know.
Yes,
a little bigger.
more responsibility.
That was after I was also a foreman up in the North Mill in the telephone cable department. I was pretty much all over the place. And I was also a night superintendent for 7 years. 12
Anaconda as well?
to 8. Yes, in Anaconda.
Wow.
In between some of these jobs. I'd have to sit down and write a big story about it.
Yeah. So you had a lot of different.
I was all over the
a lot of
place.
different areas.
Yes.
Was the Anaconda that you came back to after 2 years in the war, did it seem like the same company that you left behind, or did it seem that there were changes that the war may have brought about, that it was, there was, you know, a different feeling, or, you know, a whole lot of new employees, or the product was slightly different?
Well, there weren't that many new employees. As I say, I was only gone for 2 years. The same superintendents. And he greeted me when I come home, and we were very nice. Everything was straightened out. Nobody was angry. And it was nice to give me another job. That's when he sent me up to the North Mill. Then he brought me back from the North Mill to the lead room.
Now, when you say North Mill, that's just another building on the 25 acres
Yes,
here?
it is now service manufacturing.
Oh, okay.
Which was just sold also besides this. That was the North Mill. We didn't have too much up there. We had telephone cable we manufactured. Mostly. And, what else? Let's see.
Okay. Let's see. So you told me a lot about the number of different jobs. Were any of your jobs what you might call dangerous? Was there any physical danger involved in what you had to do? Were you ever injured, or was anybody that was working for you injured? Oh. We're
Well,
minus
that was-
one fingertip. Well, it could have been much worse.
That was stupid. I mean, it was my fault. I was down in a pit. And I was a foreman.
Uh-huh.
In those days, foremen used to work. This is before unions.
Yes.
You didn't have to be afraid of the union man. I was rolling a bobbin of wire along the base of this pit. Had the crane pull it out. It fell off the platform. And I went into a hole.
You fell off the platform.
No,
The,
the bobbin. See, the bobbin usually rides up and down on the platform, but it fell off.
uh-huh.
So we had to hook it up and take it out. So the bobbin went into a hole as I was rolling and tipped over and kept my finger between that and the wall. It was a 600-pound bobbin.
Oh, my goodness.
And Dr. Dorfler, I went right up to the office. He treated it up here.
Yeah.
He was our company doctor.
Uh-huh.
And of course, they bawled me out quite a bit about this for doing it. Why was I there? And so forth and so on.
Well, I mean, what should have happened in a situation like that? Somebody had to...
I should have said, hey, you get down, do it. But I try to run the place, keep them busy, and they were doing something at the time. Maybe maybe the foreman wasn't in that day. I don't recall.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was Jack Lynch's brother then who was my boss, Frank Lynch.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one that bawled me out for having...
For being in the
doing
pit?
it, for doing it, yes. For causing it or doing something to cause it.
Uh-huh. So you just went to his office and he treated you there.
Well,
I mean,
Eric-
in these days, you would go to St. John's or something like
Yes. Well, Eric Coates was the superintendent in charge, the 4 to 12 shift, and he's the one that took me up to Dr. Dorfler's. It was in the evening, you know, Dorfler was there. So he took me in, he took care of it.
Do you remember what he did for
And
it?
he gave me hell too. Back in those days, they used to use clips instead of stitches. You put clips in it, they clip it together, and
Yeah.
bandage it up, and I was like this.
Yeah.
And I had to go to a dance that coming weekend. So I went to the dance with my arm in a sling. It's before I was married.
Uh-huh.
And it was a little sore, but it finally healed up.
Yeah. But interesting that they all gave you grief for doing it.
Right.
Now, don't you think that's quite a switch from today if somebody had the same accident?
Oh, yes. Oh.
You know, it wouldn't have been your fault,
No,
right?
it wouldn't have been your fault.
It would have been
Right.
the company's
The
fault.
company's fault. Right. Absolutely. I get your point.
Yeah. I was wondering if you would also comment on the shift from non-union at Anaconda to the beginning of unions and, you know, that whole shift here. When you first worked, obviously, there was no union here.
No, I remember when the union started.
Do you remember how it affected you? I mean, when you first became aware of it, and
Oh, yeah, I remember it very well.
could you tell us anything about that?
This is going to go in the paper and all for everyone to
No,
read.
it's not.
Well, I was anti-union.
Uh-huh.
I figured if I wanted to go any place and get any place, it was just for me to do the job and do it properly and be promoted on those standards, not because I was a union member. So, in the wind-up, you had to pay dues. We used to pay them weekly or monthly, whatever it was. We had to go to the union hall and pay our dues, or pay the union representative, I think, in your department.
I mean, do you remember even when it was starting to be organized, was there a period where, before there was a union, there was talk of, well, should we join a union or shouldn't we join a union?
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
was that kind of a big topic for a number of months, or, you know, suddenly there was there was a union and you had to pay dues?
You know, it's hard to say how long it took, but no doubt it took a few months. I believe we had a vote on it.
I mean, do you remember like specific union organizers who came to try to interest the employees in joining a union, or?
I remember them. I didn't know them. They were out of town. They weren't in the company.
Uh-huh.
They came from the AFL, American Federation of Labor. Yeah, that's before the CIO.
Right.
AFL it was. And they got it passed anyhow. They got permission to unionize the plant.
Do you think, were things pretty content here? Was it a surprise to to you that, I mean, did the idea of a union seem like something that was necessary, or it just suddenly, or?
To who?
To you as an employee? I
Oh,
mean,
no, I didn't, I was
Oh, you said you were
anti-union.
Yeah, but how, do you think a lot of your co-workers felt the way you did?
Some of them did, yes. Now, naturally, not enough of us did,
Uh-huh.
because it
Uh-huh.
was allowed in. And a lot of them thought they would do better with the union. And personally, I can't think of anyone that did any better with the union, really. Probably was a few, but I just can't think of it. Although I knew every employee in the place. And I neglected to pay my dues for almost a year, I guess. And I was called upstairs. I was told, Jerry, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. Straighten out with them, so we don't have to get too rough with you, you know.
Now, what
It was a, what do you call it, a closed mill or something? You had to be in the union to work there. So I paid them some dues. And then they finally voted the AFL out and brought the CIO in. And I saved a whole year's dues. I was a whole year behind that I didn't pay dues. And then, at that time, foremen did not have to belong to the union. At first, they did.
I see.
Foremen had to belong. So that's how I got out of the union. And they were a little tough. I had many fights being a foreman. You have many arguments. I won't say fights,
Yes,
arguments
yeah,
with the union
yeah.
representatives. A lot of them were so ridiculous.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to stay home and have their paychecks sent to them. That's what I always said. Instead of working for it, really. I won't say everybody, but a lot of them.
Yeah. So in a way, it represented just a change in the attitude, or your attitude is, and was and is, you work hard and get paid.
Yes, yes. Get what you deserve.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
I always thought,
Yeah.
anyhow.
And then but the union continued at Anaconda, and then, I mean, can you just sort of give the progression to the end of how the union's,
Well,
what happened at Anaconda with the unions? There were
of course,
strikes,
we
I
had a
guess,
year, when I got out of the service, they were on strike,
back in the 40s.
46. It was, let's see, that was, that might have been 4 or 5 months, maybe, or 3 to 5 months on strike. I think they came back in May. I got home here in February. And I couldn't go to work until they opened up again in May. So what were veterans getting, $20 a week or something from unemployment?
Oh, wow, that must have been a hard time.
And it was a little rough. I did go to work. I worked for my father-in-law down in the Bronx.
Uh-huh.
I had to have something to do.
Yeah.
So finally I got back to work. And the union came back, and if I remember correctly, the strike didn't get them a thing.
Yeah.
Not that I recall.
Yeah.
Nothing big and nothing important.
Uh-huh.
Then, of course, they had a 10-month strike. And, when was that, 60s? The 60s sometime.
Yeah.
10 months. And all the foremen, we came in every day, and we had painted all the machinery. All the foremen worked on security, painting machinery. We had a ball, but of course Anaconda wasn't making any money. But they were very nice to us. They took care of us, every one of us. Finally the strike ended. They came back to work. Nothing. Really nothing.
You mean they
It's a
hadn't
shame.
hadn't gained anything?
They lost all this money.
Because on strike, they weren't getting any wages.
weren't getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just awful. Yeah.
So, anyhow,
Well,
let's see.
Is there anything, Anaconda ultimately closed in the 70s,
75.
75, and what do you think were the main reasons why Anaconda couldn't make it anymore?
Well, Anaconda had 28 acres here. So this is here, 28 acres. And Con Edison, if I remember correctly, they cut down a lot on their stock. They weren't stocking too much cable.
Uh-huh.
And we used to stock Con Edison cable right down in our yard, piles of it, reels of cable. They'd call up, let me have 200 feet of this. We'd
Yeah.
get the reel and cut the piece off and ship it to them.
So that was one of your big clients,
That's
Con Ed.
That was one of our big clients.
Uh-huh.
Because we had electric companies all over, Detroit Edison, all of them. They were all customers.
Even in
And,
Europe, other parts of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
At Florida, Florida Light and Power. I remember that because they had submersible cable that had to go underwater in the swamps, I guess. And I remember, manufacturing that cable. And, where were we?
Why Anaconda didn't make
Oh.
it after all.
And then we went into extra high voltage cable. We built the big aluminum building down below and the aluminum building next door to here, just to manufacture 345 kV cable.
Uh-huh.
And we made quite a bit of it, big stuff. Con Ed, and we had another couple of customers. And all of a sudden, there's no more calls for extra high voltage cable.
Uh-huh.
Remember the blackouts and brownouts?
Yeah, yeah.
And the blackouts and brownouts ceased. They stopped. Remember, we had quite a few, and then
Yes,
they stopped.
yes.
And they stopped making the cable. We weren't getting any orders. That, besides, the union was no help in keeping
Uh-huh.
it awake and keeping Anaconda going.
I'm sorry, Jerry, is there someone here that needs your attention?
Is this Noble?
No. You're facing that way?
Yeah.
Straight ahead. You see it on the left.
Left, straight?
Well, you see it on the right and on the left. You see the signs down there.
Okay, thank you.
So it was a combination of it
Yes.
just wasn't as much demand for the product, and then the unions didn't help.
And of course, I don't know about the higher ups in Anaconda. They moved to someplace. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But it seemed to be a big thing for Anaconda to close up. They were number one in the
Yeah.
copper business.
Yeah. Was there other Anaconda branches in different parts of the
Oh,
country? Was it all?
All over the country.
So they're
Oh, sure.
as big as this?
This was about the biggest as far as cable is concerned.
Uh-huh.
And we made the best cable.
But Anaconda, I mean, did it all shut down at the same time all over the country?
No. I think there was, if I remember correctly, 2 plants out west, I think, closed before us.
Uh-huh. But was the main sort of management in this company, in the Hastings Anaconda, was this kind of the head
For
branch?
a while, we had the vice president here. He had offices here. The president was down on 25 Broadway, I think, in the city. Well, we had quite a few of the big boys up here in the offices down here. And who knows?
Yeah. Now, Jerry, I understand that you were the last employee of Anaconda.
Yes.
Can you,
And I'm
for
still here.
posterity, tell anything about your last day as the last employee of Anaconda?
Well,
First of all, I guess I should ask, how did you get to be the last employee?
the older fellas, older than me, started to retire. And I was in personnel when the plant closed down. And I know everybody in the place. Anyhow, the first thing we did was lay off our security, and I had all foremen on security doing security duty here. And securing things around here, like we shut all the water off in buildings that weren't going to be heated anymore. We drained all the water so it wouldn't freeze. Mel Haynes and I were doing that. Mel Haynes was also one of the last workers here. He was next to the last. He was let go before me. And we moved our offices up here to the North Mill for a while so we could close the whole South Mill down, close it down. Water, gas, utilities, everything. Shut them off. But we still had utilities up in the North Mill. So we moved our offices up there. We still, Fosno, the plant manager, was there. Herb Anderson, the engineer, was still with us. We had a top electrician, Archie McCrae, just in case anything, just to have him handy. The plant was down.
Yeah, you weren't, there was no product that you were
No
selling
product,
anymore.
nothing, no. And we had a couple other boys. We moved stuff around. We emptied some buildings out because we had an auction. And after the auction, we had to get everything together and put it all in one spot.
Uh-huh.
And I was trying to sell. I sold a lot of the stuff
Uh-huh.
after the auction.
So
In fact, I sold something to Haberdasher in Yonkers.
Oh, yeah.
I forget what it was, paper or something,
Uh-huh.
some stuff.
So the auction was to
And
get rid of all the
Oh,
Anaconda
yeah,
equipment?
the equipment, yes. In fact, we sold all the extra high voltage equipment to Korea. All the impregnating tanks and everything, cables. It was quite a job. We had 17 little Koreans running around here getting all this stuff. It was really, it was fun. It
So
was
how
too
did
bad.
they get it all to Korea?
Brought it
And
up
was
here to
there-
the North Mill, brought it out here, put it on barges,
Uh-huh.
brought it down the city, down the bay, the harbor,
Uh-huh.
put it on ships, took it to Korea.
That must have been something to see that being loaded up for that
Oh,
faraway
my. We had-
destination.
Tremendous impregnating tanks for the extra high voltage cable. These are tremendous things. 25, 30 feet high. God, they must have been 25, 30 feet wide. Couldn't get them out of the building. They were put in there before the building went up completely.
Oh, my, yeah.
So these Koreans came with their little torches and cut them in half with a torch. You'd think it was done with a hacksaw. That's how perfect they did it. So they shipped them in 2 parts.
Yeah.
It was quite a thing. Quite a
It
thing.
must have been something.
Yeah.
So that was in the 70s?
That was 76,
So
77.
not so long ago.
No.
So you had to get rid of all the,
All the little
excess-
leftovers, yeah.
And then, so just a few of you then were left in this north
Right.
mill?
The last group were all on security. I was in charge of
Uh-huh.
the plant.
Uh-huh.
Mel Haynes was here for water breaks and stuff
Yeah.
like that. We had a couple of water breaks. And finally, what else is there to do? We rented out the North Mill to Jack, some cosmetic outfit, I know. I forget the name of
Yeah, I
it.
remember that.
And then we had
Yeah.
tennis courts up
Yeah,
there.
right, yeah.
And in fact, Noble was up in the North Mill. They rented part of the North Mill. Noble Van and Storage. Who are down here now.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
So finally, they all got out. And we sold the North Mill. That's right. I still had an office down there. They let me keep an office there. Well, we finally got Mel. Bill Thompson, one of the vice presidents of Anaconda, was in charge. He'd come over to see me every once in a while. They had an office in Greenwich.
Uh-huh.
When Anaconda left here, Atlantic Richfield bought them out.
They
Yes.
bought out
In 78, 79, 77 maybe.
Uh-huh.
But Anaconda went with Ericsson. That's that Swedish outfit that made telephone cable in Sweden. And they had an office in Connecticut. What part of Connecticut? Anyhow, it was called Anaconda Ericsson. And a lot of our office people went over there to
Oh,
work.
really?
Yes.
Uh-huh,
Greenwich,
uh-huh,
Connecticut.
yeah.
And that's where Riley was. And I was over there a couple of times to see Riley, and he'd come over here. And he finally said, Jerry,
Now Riley
when
was
you
who?
said, Riley,
Who was Riley?
he was vice president.
He was, I
of
see,
Anaconda.
yes.
So he said, well, when are you going to go? When are you going to retire, Jerry? Who's it going to be? You want to retire? I said, no. Well, I guess Mel retires. I said, okay, so Mel retired.
Uh-huh.
That left me alone,
Uh-huh.
all by myself.
Wow, that must have been...
So, come up every day, and we had a security outfit come in. I used to take them. I think it was Burn Security.
Mhm.
We were paying them to walk tours and stuff like that. And then finally we got rid of them, and we sold the North Mill. And finally Mitch Benroth come down and bought the South Mill. And he said, Jerry, I'd like to have you stay with me for 6 months anyhow. So I'm with him 8 years.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
Now I won't be with him anymore because he sold the place.
Oh, so this was the Hastings associate
Hastings
person
Associates,
who, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But he and Jay Fran, they were
Yeah,
partners.
yeah. So there was no sort of specific last day with Anaconda, you know, I mean, it all, it sort of
Let's see, how did
got
it work?
pared down gradually and then.
No, I was still here.
Yeah. There
I
was just a
retired from Anaconda, but I was hired by Benneroth to take care of the place. A week before I retired. So I was working for 2 people for a while. I was retired and working for Mitch.
Oh,
And finally they had a little retirement party for me in Manzy's. He gave me a nice watch.
uh-huh.
And my son-in-law put a nice write-up in the Enterprise. I don't know if you,
I
you
didn't.
don't remember. This was back in 80.
Maybe. Actually, we weren't in, we had been in Hastings and we were living in Europe for 4 years, and
I
we weren't,
see.
so we weren't here in 80. No, I
you weren't
didn't read
here.
it.
No.
So,
So there was no big deal.
Yeah.
I just kept coming to work the same as I did
but
for,
that's something.
for
just
46 years
yeah,
before.
Yeah, so that was, you were a long, loyal employee.
Yeah.
What do you think about the sale by Hastings Associates?
Well,
Do you
tell
know
ya,
much about it?
I don't know too much, but Mitch is the nicest fella I ever worked for, Benneroth. And he's had the place 8 years. He's been working on the village for the zoning,
Yeah, right.
changing the zoning, for 7 of those 8 anyhow, I guess. And he submitted, I don't know how many plans, I forget, I saw them all.
Yeah.
And it didn't go through, and it didn't go through. They were gonna have 10 meetings on this, and 16 meetings on this, and all these meetings. And I'm not a bit surprised, really. When Benneroth called me, he said, Jerry, I sold the place. He said, maybe you know, maybe I had an idea I was going to do that
Uh-huh.
when I sent Henry Green down to see you and show him the place.
Henry, he's a new owner.
He's the new owner,
yeah,
Henry George
yes,
Green.
right,
I
right.
said, well, Mitch, I figured something was up,
Yeah.
because I knew Green bought the North, bought out Service Manufacturing. So he said, well, that's right, Jerry.
Uh-huh.
He said, I'll be down to see you. He's supposed to come down to see me this week. Of course, nothing will be definite until October or
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah.
So I'm still safe for a while.
Yeah. Do you think it'll be a good, you know, something had to happen down here? Do you,
Oh, I think-
do you think it's going to be a good development?
So well, it was going to be a good development with Benneroth if they let him develop.
I see, yeah, yeah.
And it's going to be the same thing now. He has
Yeah.
to now fight for the zoning
Right,
change.
right, yeah.
And they're going to have more meetings on the zoning change. And it's probably going to take just as long as it took Benneroth to get to
Yeah,
zoning. I
he's
don't
gonna
know.
have the same
The only
frustration.
thing now, the only difference now is he has the whole 33
Mhm,
acres,
mhm.
including the tennis courts.
Including
Jerry
the
Allen.
tennis courts.
Well, that must be in the 33 acres. Because they think Jerry Allen is hooked up with Green some
Oh,
way.
uh-huh, well, that's, so
Because
that's the
what I
difference.
understand, they're going to have pool, tennis courts, and everything up here. I don't know how they're going to work it out.
Yeah, a fitness center or something
A
as
fitness
well.
center.
Tennis.
But at least it's the whole place now. It's not like part industrial, part,
Uh-huh,
you know, living
uh-huh,
quarters.
uh-huh,
But maybe that'll help.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll work better.
yeah. Do you, working here for so many years, was there a time when the waterfront was a bustling place of employment with lots of, you know, all the different parts of Anaconda, and do you sort of miss those days of, you know, the sort of the heyday of the industrial waterfront, or?
Well, the heyday, to me, would be the World War II.
Uh-huh, uh-huh,
Of course, when the National Conduit and Cable was here, that was World War I.
Yes.
They were making shells up in the North Mill, I think. But that's when we were the busiest since I'm here, World War II.
do you remember that, was that kind of a special?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
No, we had to get the stuff out. There was no fooling around. We
Uh-huh.
need it.
Uh-huh.
The boys over there need it.
the
So,
pressure was on.
yes, and we got
Uh-huh,
it.
uh-huh. Well, I think that that answers what I wanted to ask, if there's anything else that you'd love to,
No, I think I opened my
I mean,
mouth quite a bit.
you did, and it's terrific. Is there anything else that you wish to open it about that you haven't already, that I should have touched on, that I didn't even ask about, that you think would be good to include? I think you've given us a lot of great information, particularly on Anaconda. I guess one thing I didn't ask about, and I don't know if it's anything worth commenting on, was how the depression, this goes back, but how the depression
29.
affected, you would have been just a young boy.
Yes.
But
And,
if you
my
remember in terms of your family
My
or...
father worked in the post office, which was steady. So
Uh-huh,
the depression
Oh,
didn't hit
interesting.
us
Yes,
as hard as
yeah.
maybe a lot of other people.
yeah, so that would be a difference.
I remember it well. All I ever had was a scooter. I never even had a bicycle, for instance.
At an age where you might have had a bike,
Yes.
had it not been for the depression.
Yes.
Yeah. But your family, it didn't really change the lifestyle of your family dramatically because your father, he didn't lose a job or anything like
Right.
that.
In fact, my father also was a reporter for the Herald-Statesman. No, in those days it was the Yonkers-Statesman. It used to be the Yonkers-Statesman and the Yonkers-Herald. They combined, and now it's the Herald-Statesman, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, it is the Herald-Statesman.
My father was a reporter for that too while he was working
Oh,
in the
wow.
post office. Because he had 5 kids, so,
So we did it for more
Yes.
income.
And my mother was a hard worker all her life, and she was a saint. She's up
She's
there
up
now,
there
I'm
now.
sure. I'm positive, yes. Because,
You mean taking care of such a large family and,
yeah.
yeah. Do you think women in those days worked harder than women work today?
Yes.
In terms of all the sort of household chores that,
Yeah. I think so.
or do you think it's also an attitude of, again, there's work to be done, I'm gonna,
Well,
not
let's-
finding reasons not to do it, but
Let's
just
say
doing
they
it?
had to do it in those days.
Yeah.
They had to work harder. Today, everything comes a little easier,
Yeah.
it seems to me.
You mean because we have so many appliances and...
Right, it's hard to get people to do a day's work
Uh-huh,
today.
uh-huh.
Really.
Did your mother, with so many kids, her responsibility was in the home?
In the home.
Yeah.
She didn't have time to go out and get a job.
Yeah.
That's what you had in mind.
Well, I assume,
Yeah.
actually, I guess, like some of the families in those days, they would have absolutely had to for the
Yes.
economics.
Yes.
But, no, there's plenty to be done with.
No, I understand that.
Yeah,
So,
well, thank you very much.
if I think of anything else, I'll call you.
Okay, great.